Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic Hypersonic.
I'm Barry P. Cook, and I'm here to talk to you about the season 2 premiere of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. It was called The Broken Circle. And as the episode begins, the Enterprise is in space dock, or docked, I should say, at Starbase 1. And Captain Pike talks with number 1, who's in prison, about her case before taking off from Enterprise to go and speak with a particular lawyer that they both think can help her with her case. In his absence, Spock is in command of the Enterprise and concerned that his emotions are now flowing a bit more freely since he released some of the cognitive blocks that all Vulcans use to control their emotions when he allowed himself to get angry in order to fight the Gorn. As he's consulting with the doctor who introduces him to the liar as a means of reducing stress, which is interesting, Nurse Chapel comes in, and that has a noticeable effect on Spock's heart rate. Speaking of Nurse Chapel, she informs the doctor that she's thinking of applying to a fellowship program that would take her away from the Enterprise for a couple of months. When the Enterprise receives a message from La'an, who's taking a leave of absence from Starfleet and who is located on a planet at the edge of Klingon space, in which she speaks of an anti-Federation threat, Spock asks Admiral April for permission to take the Enterprise there to investigate, but April denies permission because the Federation isn't supposed to go near that planet for another 30 days based on a treaty arrangement they have with the Klingons, with whom they share mining rights at the planet. After consulting with the senior staff, Spock decides to take the Enterprise there anyway and refers to it as stealing the Enterprise, which I guess it is. He goes about this by having a crew member, whose last name is Mitchell, simulate a warp core breach so that he can evacuate the ship, but a Lanthanite commander participating in inspections on Enterprise very easily figures this out and guesses at why he might have done it, before helping him make it seem more legitimate, which triggers the Starbase to order the Enterprise to put distance between itself and the base. Said same commander, who so far I find extremely annoying, then volunteers to be the chief engineer on the quote-unquote mission, and Spock orders the Enterprise to the planet in question via the inaugural use of what may become his get underway catchphrase.
I would like the ship to go. Now.
Meanwhile, on said planet, the Klingons are Klingoning, and La'an gets into a drinking contest with one, which she wins when her opponent can't hold his blood wine. After she then induces another Klingon to set a meeting between her and someone who wants to buy a bunch of Starfleet phasers for some reason, Spock, the doctor, Uhura, who is now officially an ensign, no longer a cadet, and Chapel show up to talk with her about why she messaged the Enterprise. Apparently, a new syndicate is seeking to restart the war between the Klingons and the Federation in order to increase demand for dilithium, which is now low with a treaty in place, or lower than it otherwise was, I guess, during the war. When the doctor and Nurse Chapel make it obvious that they have medical skills when they treat some folks who were injured in a recent explosion at the mine, they're shanghaied into helping some other folks at phaser point at the hands of a Klingon woman. While they're rendering said aid, they learn that the Syndicate has built a fake Crossfield-class Federation starship. Which they imagine they've done so that they can perpetuate a false flag attack on some Klingons that will probably do the job of restarting the war. They then take some kind of serum that turns them into basically yellow sun-exposed Kryptonians and fight their way through a bunch of Klingons in hand-to-hand combat in order to get to the ship's transponder, the location of which the doctor determines by harshly interrogating one Klingon officer, and alter its signal to alert the Enterprise to the situation, and then fight their way through yet more Klingons while trying to escape the ship before it launches, which they're unable to do, finding themselves stuck behind a set of doors as the ship departs. A Klingon cruiser arrives in orbit as the fake Federation ship reaches orbit, and the Enterprise reads its signal, which instructs the Enterprise to destroy it. This causes Spock to figure out exactly what's going on, including that the transponder signal was altered by the Doctor and Chapel after they went missing, which would explain why they went missing. He orders the Enterprise to follow the fake Federation ship, which sees them and fires on them. Ortegas manages to avoid most of their shots by flying the Enterprise quite creatively. The Doctor and Chapel decide to jump into space from the fake Federation ship without UV suits, holding each other and one helmet that has a transponder in it, just before Spock destroys the fake Federation ship, his eyes welling up. When the helmet's transponder signal is detected, the Enterprise beams Chapel and the Doctor aboard in a single transporter beam, and Spock has to resuscitate a very near-death Chapel, which he does quite frantically. He then has to convince the Klingon commander that he did, in fact, destroy the other ship because it was about to attack the Klingon ship, and he didn't want the war reignited, which he ends up doing over a couple of mugs of blood wine when the Klingon says he can only tell whether or not Spock's lying by looking him in the eye in person. Apparently, the engineer commander and some of her people lived on Earth until the 22nd century without humans realizing they were there. And apparently, she knows Spock's mother. We find this out when they have a conversation just after Spock meets with the Klingon commander. It further turns out that she left her teaching position at the Academy because she hopes to stay aboard Enterprise, as she surmises that life there is exciting, unlike life at the Academy, which apparently is boring. After a dressing down from Admiral April, who decides that Spock's blood wine hangover is enough punishment for his actions, which he hopes Spock never takes again, even though we know that he does, Spock goes to visit a sleeping nurse Chapel in sickbay, which he finds very upsetting, despite the fact that the doctor tells him that she's just resting and will recover fully from her exposure to space. Before the episode ends, we see that the Admiralty is keeping an eye on a situation with the Gorn that may escalate to war. And that's where the episode ends. So I was disappointed with this episode. I thought the performances were great, that it looked gorgeous, that the character stuff with the Doctor and Chapel was really good, and I even kind of liked the basic plot of the story about a greedy syndicate trying to restart the Federation Klingon War for profit, despite the fact that such a story is nothing new in literature. And it was great to see proper Klingons again in live action, small screen Star Trek, but I don't see why they had to go the route of the senior staff stealing the ship against orders in order to tell the story of this war instigation plot, because it could have been told as something that the Enterprise discovered in the course of its normal duty. And I think going this route did a disservice to the show by depicting the senior staff as all too easily willing to go rogue like that, especially in the case of Spock, who I think would have decided that the Admiral was right when he told Spock that it didn't make sense to go to the planet under the circumstances that exist between they and the Klingons, based on a vague message from an officer on leave. And I think he would have tried to find some other way to investigate the situation. What really sucks about that is that it sort of takes the air out of the balloon that is Spock's similar actions in the menagerie, which come off in that episode as crazy, crazy out of character for him, but which now are just a repeat of actions he's taken before, which in my eyes diminishes the gravitas of his actions in the menagerie. Like, when he does that in the menagerie, steals the ship, everybody's like, whoa, what the hell? That's way out of character for Spock. This is serious. I can't believe he did that. Wow. But now he's done it before. So I didn't understand that. And, of course, these actions didn't come up when he was court-martialed during menagerie, which we can only assume now is because April didn't put it in his record, which doesn't make sense because there's no way the incident with the Syndicate didn't get noted in Starfleet's records just because of its significance. So I don't get that. Also, where was Section 31? Or regular Starfleet intelligence for that matter? How is it that it took an officer on leave who happened to be on this planet to inform the Enterprise of what was going on versus Section 31 being aware of it, which of course they would have been, and dealing with it themselves? In other words, if there's a new syndicate in town, as it were, that's pulling shenanigans and seems to be plotting to restart the war, and that is in fact secretly building a fake Federation starship, I think Section 31 or Starfleet intelligence would have gotten wind of stuff like that. And I think it would have made more sense if when Spock got there, he encountered Starfleet intelligence sort of already on the case and maybe worked with them. But the idea that it didn't even come up on their radar is just like, why do you have Section 31? Why was it created narratively? So that it would be involved in stuff like that. So I didn't understand that. Another critique I have is that I think it would have been nice to see at least something of what Pike was doing while all of this was happening. I think that would have been a nice B plot for the episode if we'd seen, something of where exactly he went and what exactly he did in pursuit of making contact with this someone who can help number one. As I said earlier, I didn't like the engineer character as we saw her in this episode, so I'm concerned that she's not going to be a good fit for the crew, and it's a shame because I love the actress that's playing her. And, the whole thing with the super serum was absolutely ridiculous. Like, what was that? I would have had an easier time buying that they got a hold of some guns and managed to survive a fierce firefight than that bullshit. That was just ridiculous. But to get back to Spock, it'll be interesting to see where they go with this whole thing about Spock having removed the mental blocks that keep him from experiencing emotions, because it's obvious from the trailer for the season that they intend to move things forward to some degree between he and Chapel. And at least it would now make some kind of sense if his removal of those blocks is something that doesn't get reversed right away for one reason or another, be it a choice on his part not to immediately restore them or an inability on his part to immediately restore them. And I say interesting because it's something that would allow them to continue to explore, as they did in season one, his emotional side in his lieutenant days, with a rationale behind it that's more concrete than, well, he was just young at that point and not the same guy that we saw in the original series, which would be a good thing. Also, if as part of that, they go where it seems from the season two trailer they're going to go with regards to his relationship with Chapel, it would have the effect of making more poignant her heartbreak during the original series era at not being able to be with him at that point, like she will once have been in the past at that point, because he eventually restored those blocks and went back to not experiencing emotion. And it would make what they've shown in season one of them having a certain closeness that didn't exist in the original series less contradictory of the actual state of their relationship during the original series, because the lack of any relationship to speak of between them in the original series, which exists despite the fact that they were once close, would make more sense as opposed to not being explained at all if it's shown that the reason they wound up close is because he was functioning without his emotion experiencing barriers at the time. That makes sense? Play it back a couple times. It might, I think. Anyway, this episode was far from horrible, but I'm not in love with some of the choices they made for this episode, for this story. And overall, I think it was weak for a season premiere. I really do. So, yeah, I mean, there's not a lot more to say. I really enjoyed this show overall last season. I've been looking forward to it since season two was announced. So I'm hoping that things are better next episode and thereafter, but we're going to have to wait at least a week to see. So there you go. I'm going to get out of here for now. I'll be back to review next week's episode once it's released. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.